Good morning. It must be remembered now that you who are hearing me, or even you who are hearing these tapes, are not children in truth. They're not babes. You could not have gone through the reading and the hearing that you have and remained children in truth as you were. It is said that we should give milk to the babes and meat to those who have grown to the stature of manhood in truth. And so it is that you must remember that is what is being given to you is not being given to you by my will or by my wish. I am not sitting here for 6 or 7 weeks just for the purpose of hearing myself talk, nor for the purpose of enriching myself or gaining fame. The work that I have been doing here these 7 weeks is because of an inner urge compelling me to do that which I'm doing, and often voicing itself through me. And it is not merely for your sakes who are sitting here, any more than any spiritual message has been for the particular individual who originally received it, nor for their immediate disciples. But as the Master indicated, heaven and earth can pass away, but not my words. And it has been literally true that there have been heavens and hell on earth since his day, but his word still survives for those capable of assimilating it. And so it is with this message. What use you or I make of it is of relative unimportance so far as the message is concerned. The words that have been voiced through me, whether the writings or the recordings continue or not, these words have entered human consciousness, have been admitted to human thought, and they will never die. All of the numerals 2 times 2 is 4 may disappear from the earth, they may be outlawed, but the principle of 2 times 2 is 4 will forever remain to be apprehended by anyone of a mathematical mind. And so truth may be legally outlawed, as it has been in times past. Religion may be outlawed, as it has been in times past. And as there are attempts now in various state legislatures to repeat again, there are actually laws in legislative bodies at this moment aimed at outlawing every truth teaching, so that only Orthodox church teachings can remain. Don't forget that at one time in one state within the past 5 years, it missed only by 1 vote outlawing the practice of Christian Science and Unity and New Thought. Just 1 vote separated that state from losing the only 3 teachings that have in them the germ that can save the world ultimately. It can happen again. It is so in Russia. It could easily have been so here a few years ago. It can be again. But that will not take from human consciousness the truth that has already been revealed. And so it will be that future generations can pick up where we have left off. Or it may be that we can pick up where other generations have left off. Now, this you have heard before, you will hear again. By virtue of having been born, we are under the law. We are under the law of cause and effect. We are under the law of environment, the law of heredity. We are under the law of infection and contagion. We are under the law of sin and desire. We are under the law of wealth and poverty. Merely by virtue of having been born, we are subject to every human belief that exists anywhere on earth. At some period in our experience, we have tired of that continuous round of good and evil, with mostly evil and a little bit of good squeezed in between. And we have turned to truth, to spiritual wisdom. And in that moment, we began bringing ourselves out from under the law. With the very first turning to spirit, with the first turning away from ritual, creed, dogma, we were bringing ourselves out from under the law of ritual, creed, and dogma. From the moment that we turned to an invisible support, in that very moment we began to separate ourselves from dependence on a visible support. And so, from the moment that we turn to truth, we have been removing ourselves from the law and bringing ourselves under the grace of spirit. Now, for a long, long while on this path, it becomes necessary that we consciously remember that we are removing ourselves from under the law and bringing ourselves under grace. That is why in the book, The Infinite Way, we have those passages on waking in the morning. There isn't anything more important than those 4 or 5 pages in all spiritual literature, if they're carried out. Because once we acquire the habit of waking in the morning and instantly turning our thought to the realization that our dependence is upon the invisible, not the visible, that we do not live by bread alone or by anything in the external realm, but that we live by grace, by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. From that moment on, we are an expanding consciousness. And whereas for a month we may read those very passages every single day, we may ponder them, meditate upon them, but surely by the time the end of 1 month has rolled around, we are no longer using that passage. By that time, thoughts of our own along that line have begun to come to us, and we start to expand from the statements that are in those pages. Once those pages become a formula within us, they have lost their value. Unless those pages give us or act as seeds within us, seeds which break open and die, so that we can forget every word that's on those pages, because out of them has come a larger vision, an extension of consciousness, a deeper meaning, and perhaps more illustrations, more examples, more or deeper ideas than are contained in those pages. But be assured of this: if those pages are fulfilling their mission, if you are permitting them to fulfill their mission in you, within a month you will be able every morning on waking to turn within and receive from the Father some assurance of omnipresence, some assurance of grace. You will not, for many months, have to make statements of truth. You will not have to repeat any kind of truth statements. You will, within a very short time, be able merely to turn within and let truth statements come to you. Then you will find that if you have your conscious contact with God, that you will be told every single day, I am with you. Fear not. Go about your business. I'll be there ahead of you. Something at least that will be in the nature of an assurance that you are not walking through this life alone, that you are not living on your strength, that you are not working with your intelligence alone, that always there will be a guiding influence that will know just one thing more than you yourself know, that will empower you with 1 degree more of strength than you yourself possess. And so you will be guided up this street and down that alley in accord with harmony, rather than cut across a main boulevard into trouble. Now, from time immemorial, this message has been given to the world, and at this very moment it is being repeated in a half a dozen places in the world, widely separated places, almost in these words. It's a miracle to watch some of the things that are being written in far places in the world, and to see how they follow the self-same line. And there's only one answer to that: that the same mind, the same Spirit that raised up Jesus Christ from the dead is operating in those, through those who are giving at this time this message. So it is that as you make your contact with that mind, first in lesser degree, later in greater degree, that mind begins to function your life. And you'll find yourself literally saying, you know, I'm alive and I'm living, but really there's something more than me functioning in me. There's something more than me directing me or guiding me or prospering me or strengthening me. And then you'll understand the infinite invisible. Now, let us not take it for granted because we read spiritual literature or hear a spiritual message or find ourselves in the consciousness of some few who are spiritually endowed. Let us not assume that that is fully functioning in our experience, because while it is to some extent, it is not to the full extent that is necessary for you. if the disciples' 3-year association with the Master, virtually living with him for 3 years, had been sufficient, Judas wouldn't have betrayed, Peter wouldn't have denied, and Thomas wouldn't have doubted. Don't forget, they did all those things, and at the crucifixion they all disappeared. Why? After 3 years of living in the Master's consciousness, because his consciousness could not make their full demonstration. He could lead them. He could show them the way. He could lead them. In some degree, he could even live their lives for them. He could send them out on the road without purse or script, and by virtue of his consciousness, they would be fed. They could even do healing works through his consciousness, through thy name. But when it came to their own personal, private, individual lives, that is when they had to make the demonstration for themselves, and they failed. So much so that the Master said, if I go not away, the Comforter will not come to you. The full revelation will not come to you. You see, all we are seeking is the Comforter. The very moment we have the realization within ourselves of the Comforter, we have no need anymore of religious teachers or leaders or books. We now are taught of God, fed of God, maintained and sustained by God. We can go off all by ourselves. The only thing we can't do is forget our debt of love and gratitude to everyone who helped us along the path until we achieved the realization of the Comforter. That we can't do. Every one of us has a practitioner, a teacher, a somebody, and sometimes 3 and 4 somebodies back in our lives who have guided us through difficult periods and who have given us true teaching even at times when we couldn't accept them. And not one of them must ever disappear from our consciousness. Never must the love, the devotion, the loyalty, the gratitude disappear from us, even though in the outward world we have long since gone our own way and they have gone their way, because they have helped us to make contact with our source. And so we no longer need them as teachers or leaders, but for our own sake, just as we love God, not that God needs our love, but we need to feel the love of God, so we need to feel the love of God made manifest as man. Because if you say you love God whom you have not seen, but do not love your fellow man whom you have seen, you are a liar. Now, all this is brought about so that you accept the responsibility that is placed upon your shoulders as students of life, students of God, students of the Christ. Just as freedom, liberty, entails serious responsibilities, so does spiritual freedom. The average person thinks of freedom or liberty as license, the freedom to do anything they want to do, forgetting that freedom means the freedom to live so that all may be one. This idea of a free citizen doesn't mean an individual is free in their own being to do anything they want to do. It means they are free to unite for the good of all. And it is that very point that is often lost sight of. That is why these book people who publish obscene literature feel that they're doing it as part of a guarantee of the Constitution, freedom of the press. And they construe that to mean the freedom to be corrupt and to corrupt others. And freedom doesn't mean that. That is why liquor sellers Have no hesitancy and just keep on selling and selling and selling, no matter how stupid drunk their customer may be. Because this is a free country. They have the right to do anything they like, and the alcoholic has the right to do anything he has. And that isn't true. That is not a right sense of liberty or freedom. Liberty and freedom mean the right to uphold each other, the right to stand in freedom of rightness with each other. And so it comes with this responsibility of spiritual freedom. It doesn't mean that we are free to do anything we like, nor to ignore the laws of God or grace. But on the contrary, it places a deep responsibility upon us, not only to love our neighbor as ourselves, no, much deeper, much further than that, even to be our brother's keeper. Now, this you must know. No one can even help another, except in proportion as they themselves have arrived. No one can give spiritual help to anyone unless they themselves are spiritually endowed. And so the first rule of spiritual wisdom is to forget the world. Forget doing good for the world. Forget your fellow man. And develop your own spiritual soul. Develop your own integrity. Develop your own ability, your spiritual ability, your spiritual capacity. Let the world alone. There are probably enough other Jesuses and Pauls and Johns scattered around the world under different names, so that until you are ready to get into the battle, they can take care of the world without you. So concern yourself, first of all, with establishing your own spiritual integrity, your own spiritual identity. Be spiritually endowed. Then automatically you become your brother's keeper. Then automatically you begin to put into practice loving thy neighbor as thyself. Why? Because your spiritual endowment is like an atmosphere of God. It's like a rich perfume. It escapes from you without any conscious effort. You then do not have to go up and down the world being a do-gooder. Just the mere fact that you are in the world, an aroma of spirituality, a degree of spiritual power is flowing out from you, elevating all human consciousness, even at times when you cannot see a visible result. It was a most wonderful experience yesterday to have another letter from our friend, the Reverend, who is chaplain in the mental institute as well as minister of a Protestant church, saying that the little booklet, Deep Silence of My Peace, has meant so much to so many, and that just in having small groups read it aloud, they have learned a new concept of prayer. Well, you see, that's without conscious effort, isn't it? I mean, nobody up here tried to do anything out in Alabama. As a matter of fact, let us say that as I stood in that Truth Center in Seattle, and that message came through, we little knew that it would be going out into the Protestant ministry and mental institutes and prisons to teach people new concepts of prayer. And that's what I mean by your spiritual endowment blesses without any conscious effort on your part or mine. Just think now how many churches this message is in some way being represented in, either read from the desk on Sunday or given out as pamphlets. And even the truth centers, how many of them are using this material. A letter came yesterday requesting permission to republish in a magazine excerpts from Living the Infinite Way and the monthly letters. And that's going out to an entirely different field of people than we know. And of course you can't say that any one of us humanly had anything to do about it, because all that we did was what? Well, all we did was drop into Mrs. Bowman's to hear a tape, and then I would talk for a little while, and it was taken down on the tape. Now here it is, just because we met as we are meeting here in her home for a few weeks, here that message is going all over the world. Did we dream in those mornings that that message was going to go all over the world? Edition after edition in books, tapes, pamphlets? No, we had no idea of that. All we thought of was meeting there to hear a little message of truth. And here all of a sudden it blossoms into all of these different avenues by its own virtue, by its own presence, by its own power, showing clearly that we were but instruments through which all of this took place. Now, it is so with you. You have no idea what word you may speak to someone today, or what thought you may think today that will end up a passage going all around the world. And the reason is that you are not having any thought of sending any message around the world. You are thinking only of your own spiritual unfoldment. And then in some miraculous way, God will get it out of your mouth into somebody else's ear. And the first thing you know, it'll be repeated to you from the other ends of the world. But you see the point that that is coming through here today, that the whole thing has nothing to do with our being missionaries to the world. We aren't that at all. We are just students of the Christ who are here for one purpose, and that is the perfecting of ourselves in our spiritual capacity, in bringing to our consciousness spiritual endowments, spiritual presence, spiritual power. What use God makes of it after it gets there is God's business. Our function now is not to go out looking for concert engagements, but to practice scales. Now, this you are being helped in by your reading, by your hearing, by your associating together. But you are not being perfected in it through these things. You can only be perfected in it by what you do in the hours that you are alone. That is what counts. Just as never think for a moment that these messages come through just by sitting here in this chair and opening the mouth. They come through because of the hours and weeks and months and years that have gone before. Very few know of a 10-year period in my life in which I studied 3,000 books which form my library. Just for one purpose. They didn't teach me anything that wasn't being revealed by God, but they showed me how universal the message was, so that I couldn't ever get conceited, and so that I couldn't ever get to be a leader. They showed me that this is the wisdom of the ages, and not only that, but they kept me in the atmosphere and consciousness of those who originally said them. You cannot live in the consciousness of a written book or a message that has come through spiritual unfoldment and not partake of the consciousness of the writer. That is what makes the words of Jesus so powerful. not the words themselves, but the consciousness of the one who brought them to our consciousness. That is why the Golden Rule, which we now know existed for 1,500 years before the Master and appears in 6 different religious papers before the Master was ever on earth, the reason that Golden Rule has endured is not because of the words in it, but because of the consciousness behind those words. Now, as long as you know that as a human being you exist as a branch that is cut off and withereth, it becomes your function to say, I will not tolerate such a condition in my life. I will maintain myself consciously one with the Christ of my inner being, knowing that Christ is the Son of God and is forever one with the Father. And so you will then awaken in the morning and you will say, please, Father, don't let me make the mistake of leaving this room until I have realized consciously thy presence. And then later, be sure before leaving the home that you say, Father, don't let me leave here under my own steam. Let me be sure that I'm connected up. And sit again for that moment of contact. And so 12 times throughout the day, remember that as a human being I'm cut off, but I don't want to be a human being, and I have no intention of allowing myself to come under the law, because harmony is always evident under grace. And so make your conscious union, your conscious contact, and keep at it, even though there may be periods of discord and inharmony in between. Because remember, as Paul says, I can't declare yet that I've arrived at the fullness, but at least forgetting those things which are past, I'm going to go further. And so it is with us. Just because you do consciously remember your oneness and you do make your contact, don't be discouraged if you find yourself in some prison or other along the way. It happened to Jesus on the cross. It happened to John in prison. It happened to John of Patmos. It happened to Paul. Paul, I guess, died in prison. John died in prison. Many were thrown into the lions' dens. Don't for a minute be disturbed about problems that may come to you while you are on this path, because it is inevitable that some form of problem touch us at every step, in order that we may remain awake and realize that good isn't just one of those natural things that always happens, that it is something that comes only by virtue of our conscious union with God. And so these problems often prevent us from going off into just the belief, oh, I've arrived now, everything's going to be all right from now on, and then finding that this is not so. Now, the problems that come to your personal experience will probably lessen as you yourself take hold of yourself and remove yourself from under the law and bring yourself under grace. There's no doubt that there will not be such deep problems, nor will they be such lengthy problems, and but the problems that come to you from the world will be the deeper ones. Gradually you will have brought to you the sins of the world, the deaths of the world, the fatal diseases of the world, and then you'll begin to know what serious problems are really like. But you will not be meeting them as your own problem. You will be meeting them in a more impersonal way, and so you will deepen again your spiritual capacities, because with every victory, with every revelation of harmony, you yourself have been deepened in Christ. You yourself have attained a deeper awareness, a greater spiritual endowment. Now, I have here a letter that illustrates this very, very well. As you know, we do not use testimonies for testimony's sake. And certainly, the identity of an individual is kept in the background for their own sake. But there must be times when we are permitted to use a testimony for the purpose of illustrating the principle, not for boasting or bragging about our capacities, but for the purpose of showing forth a principle, and this is just such an experience. Remember the letter I wrote last year asking help for my very old cat. Shortly after that, she became in better health than she had been for years. 3 days ago, she stopped eating, lost all interest in everything, and would growl at me when I would try to coax her to eat, or even if I would touch her. You must understand this, those of you who do not know it, that animals have what is called a normal lifespan, and that when they reach the end of that span, they as a rule will just crawl off into a corner and stop eating and wait for a day or two and then pass out. That is their usual way when they've reached their limit of human experience. Now, many years ago, almost in my first years, a woman who was second reader with me when I was reading in the prisons had a Persian cat that had gone beyond its span. It was then 13 years of age. And it reached that stage, went over in a corner, wouldn't eat, and wouldn't permit Helen to come near it. And she wired me for help for that cat. And within an hour, it jumped up, went over and began eating, and the last I knew of that cat, it was 17 years of age, and it was still in good health. In fact, it outlived Helen. So I don't know what became of it afterward. Now, that is the experience that evidently came to this cat. Yet, having lived its span, according to human belief, the very fact that it snapped out of it and was in better health than before shows that the human belief was broken, and that it was now not living a human span. Now it was living its spiritual existence. All right, but that was the demonstration of the moment, just like Lazarus being raised from the dead by the Master. But evidently, later on, he passed on. Why? Because he again returned to human consciousness. In other words, he took on the beliefs of the people with whom he lived and associated and moved, and brought himself back under the law again, although he had been removed from it. And so with this cat, eventually, by virtue of living in a neighborhood with human beings, it would again come under the human law. Now see this point, that even though you are raised from the dead by spiritual power, that you still can go back under the law. if you yourself permit yourself to come under the influence of the universal belief. Oh, I wish you could see this point. Look. The mere fact that you may be brought out of your humanhood today and become a spiritual giant. You may yourself be raised from the dead, or you may raise others from the dead. It doesn't say that you will not go back under the law. Again, it is your responsibility, because there is the mesmerism of the world that every single moment is saying, you are a human being, you were born and you will die. You are born of woman and you will return to dust. And as against that, there must be an activity of your own consciousness, removing you from under the law and keeping you under grace. And when you have come under grace, don't think you can relax. No, you have achieved nothing but a temporary victory. You will have to maintain through the activity of truth in your own consciousness your life under grace. Otherwise, you have no knowledge of what moment some man will come along as a tempter to a woman, some woman will come along as a tempter to a man, money or fame will come along as a tempter to others. You have no idea of that, and don't think for a single moment that you ever advance so high spiritually in this plane that temptation in one form or another cannot come. If it would come in no other way, it would come in the temptation of, I think I'd like to retire. I mean, it's bound. It's more apt to come in the guise of good than of evil. I have said this before, and I've had occasion to witness enough to believe it, that I doubt that there are many people who really are touched by the Spirit that are very seriously tempted into evil. I doubt that very much. I've seen very, very little of the temptation to commit evil on the part of a person who has once been touched. I mean, actually spiritually touched. But I have seen loads of them tempted by good, tempted by fame, tempted by wealth, tempted by ease, tempted to go off the path in some human way that is not necessarily a spiritual way. Now, Three days ago she stopped eating, lost all interest in everything, and would growl at me when I would try to coax her to eat, or even if I would touch her. My first temptation was to call for help. Then it seemed to be a challenge to me, so I set to work in the new way which you have been teaching us. I could not get any click. For most of the night I kept at it. Then early this morning came. Man was not meant to remain human. Now, the first of all, you see the major point of the work we're doing here, it came. Not I declared, not I affirmed, not it was in your books and I repeated it 100 times. No, it came. And there is lesson number one. The very moment that you have touched this spiritual center, it begins to come. The messages begin to come. The word begins to flow, so that you do not expect anymore to heal by declarations or affirmations or even by what you know. Now you expect only to heal by the Word of God which comes to you. And so it came. Man was not meant to remain human. It seemed to mean a great deal to me in this way. I had been seeing that as there is only one life, then the life of animal or man is one. So I knew that the message concerned the cat. It seemed very clear that I should not even think of trying to keep her here. I even wondered if it were right for me to try to keep anyone here on this plane. Now let's stop there a moment, because there is a tremendous point. Man was not meant to remain human. That did not mean that it was meant that at some portion of our lives we should die and become something else. It meant that at some point in our experience we were to give up our human identity for our spiritual identity. That is what is described in Romans. To them who received the Spirit of God, to them gave he power to become sons of God. You see? The very moment that you make this contact within you, then do you receive the power to make the full demonstration of becoming the Son of God. Not the Son of Man or the Son of Woman, but the Son of God. That is, to enter your spiritual identity. Now, with this healing, this cat passed from its human existence, even its 9 lives, into its spiritual existence. And if it could remain in the home or in the consciousness of those who would forever maintain the spiritual nature of being, there's no reason why that cat couldn't live forever. It never has to die, because it has left its humanhood by very virtue not of man or woman's thought, but of this word that came from God. It has been removed from its humanhood into its spiritual identity. But even if it should leave this plane, which it undoubtedly will because of its association with all the human thought around it, even then it will go right on living its spiritual life, because it has been translated. It has made the transition. It is now no longer living by bread alone. It is no longer living by being less than 12 years of age. Now it is living in spite of its age. Now it is living in spite of any human condition of death. And so, whether it continues here or not, it will continue its spiritual existence, because it has been so removed. And so it is. Once the Christ has sufficiently taken over that it lives our lives, even though we may succumb to a mesmeric sense of the world in one way or another, even to the extent of passing on, it does not change the fact that inwardly we have attained our spiritual life and will continue to function not as human beings on the next plane, but as spiritual beings. You see, the same thing happens on the next plane that happens here. There are those here who are living entirely human lives. There are those like ourselves who are living partly human lives and partly spiritual lives. There are those here on earth who have passed from human life and are now living their spiritual life on earth, although if you were to see them, you would see them dressed just as we are dressed and outwardly appearing as we look. But that is only an appearance to us. Actually, they have attained their Christhood. That same thing was true of the Master. If you looked at the Master, you would undoubtedly be of those who would say, that is our neighbor Mary's son, or that is our neighbor the carpenter. But if you were of the level of Peter's consciousness, you would see that no, that is not true. This is Christ, the Son of God. He has already made the transition and is now living a Christ life instead of a human life. And if that had not been true, he could not have made the demonstration of appearing even to the 500 who witnessed him after the crucifixion. It was only because he himself was no longer in a grave state of consciousness, and therefore he could make himself visible to those who likewise were above the grave state of consciousness. How much of this meditation was coming from consciousness, or how much was just me, I don't know. Well, you see, it was all coming from consciousness, because there isn't anything in your experience that would enable you to know that man must eventually leave the human way of life, the human state of life. That had to come to you by spiritual illumination, and so it was all from consciousness. I did leave the patient alone, and when I returned she was outside showing some interest in life again. Last night she ate a big supper, and this morning she is her old loving self again. Now, do you see that? There comes a time for us to cease being human beings, to cease living our human lives. That does not mean that we must die. It does not mean that we must pass on to attain our spiritual estate. It is a point of transition that takes place in consciousness. It is revealed by Paul in his statements of dying daily, in order that we may be reborn of the Spirit. Now, every day that we consciously remove ourselves from under the law and acknowledge ourselves to live under grace, every day that we do that, and every hour of every day that we have a conscious realization that we are living on the invisible and by the invisible, not by anything visible, we are in that degree dying daily. And then what happens one day is that we die completely and are reborn in the Spirit. And at that moment there is no longer a human reaction to life. Life then is lived on an entirely different plane. The reactions are different. The things of the world run off the shoulder, off the back like water off a duck's back, without affecting it in any way. One is not subject to the laws of the world, only to divine grace. And it is then that one teacher said, sometimes I have fear because I go out in all kinds of horrible weather without sufficient clothing and never catch cold. I realize I'm completely immune to the activities or thoughts or beliefs of the world. And this particular teacher had the idea that she might soon make a transition because of it, but she stayed 30 years after that statement. Now, you see, transition isn't a physical thing. Transition is an act of consciousness which appears physically. For instance, the worm goes through a period of transition and emerges as a butterfly. But there is no physical transformation. A worm doesn't become a butterfly. A state of consciousness drops its worm self and rises in its butterfly self. There is no such thing as a physical transformation of matter. The transformation is something taking place in consciousness, externalizing itself as form. So it is that when a spiritual transition takes place, you might have an appetite for one kind of food today and find tomorrow that you can't eat it. You may never have eaten certain foods and tomorrow find that they're the only ones you enjoy. That was not a matter of taste. That was a matter of consciousness appearing in a physical form. In the same way, you may enjoy certain physical pleasures, pastimes, exercises, games today, and in your spiritual elevation, find that you no longer can indulge them. That happens repeatedly with smoking, drinking, card playing, things that to the human are absolutely normal, sometimes absolutely necessary. And yet, the moment of that spiritual transition, they couldn't even play a game of golf anymore, or tennis. Do you see what I mean? The whole nature is transformed. And that doesn't mean that there's any evil in golf or tennis or perhaps in smoking or an occasional drink. It doesn't mean there's any evil in them. It just means that they no longer satisfy the changed consciousness. They were all right for a certain state of consciousness, just like rattles and dolls were at one stage of our experience, and then they become not only unnecessary later, but they would even become distasteful if they were forced upon us. And it's because we have outgrown that particular state of consciousness. So it is that we outgrow, through this transition, the mortal or material state of consciousness and no longer indulge the human appetites or the human desires or the human fears or the human anxieties. An entirely different consciousness requires an entirely different kind of food. Milk for the babes, meat for those ready for it. You know, this morning I was congratulating myself that I would only have to talk for 10 minutes today because we were going to have all meditation. And somebody crossed me up. Well, let's have a little meditation now. Remember that when you first sit down to meditate, it is perfectly legitimate, perfectly right, if you make some declarations of truth within yourself, reminders, whatever might come to your thought. It has to be a spiritual truth about God. Don't go looking for any spiritual truth about man, or you'll get in trouble. If you must know something and you must make a declaration, must remind yourself of truths, be sure that they are truths about God or spiritual creation or spiritual law or spiritual substance and so forth and so on. Keep your statements of truth high along that level. Then, as soon as possible, settle back into that listening attitude, because you know now that your thoughts are never going to heal anyone, no matter how correct they may be. It is only when the impulse comes from within, as it did in this case, and brings you some statement of truth or some feeling of peace, that you can say the Word of God has taken place, and I know the action's going to be quick and powerful. And this is going to be very tough medicine to take. But this is the truth. In this letter, it said that I wasn't sure whether it was even right to keep the cat from passing on, or even whether it is right to keep anyone from passing on. And let me tell you something. While this is a very, very hard saying, it is literally true. Don't be too concerned about those who pass on or who can't be saved, or those whose desire is only to live on in matter. That is, just for the sake of breathing and eating some meals, because that's not really living. That's a living death. That's the walking dead. People whose lives go no further than eating, drinking, sleeping, and housekeeping, with nothing beyond, or working in business, they're just as dead when they're alive as when they're dead. So it amounts to nothing to see them go on. Whatever opportunity they're going to have for spiritual unfoldment, they will also have in the next experience. Now, in the case of these animals, you see that they have so little resistance to truth that they can be more readily given the transition to their spiritual experience than some humans. Just as the experience was in Portland, where a woman said yes, she could see all this for herself, but not for her grandchild. You see, we get so attached to the ways of the world that we want to live for nothing more nor less than eating, drinking, sleeping, and maybe for perpetuating ourselves through children or grandchildren. And for that reason, we do not give up our human life for our spiritual one, because we want to take either our money into heaven with us, or we want to take our fame or our family. And that is the bar. You don't get into heaven that way. You don't attain your spiritual life as long as you're trying to take even the world with you. You see, there is again the hard saying, you must leave mother, brother, sister, and father for my sake. Unless you are on this path only for the purpose of saving your own soul, that is, of coming into the realization of your true identity, unless you're doing it purely for that motive, you are not going to attain the transition. If you think you're going to carry your family with you, or bring peace on earth, or go out and be a miracle healer, you're going to lose the way. You can have no motive in this except the motive to achieve your spiritual identity. Then, when your spiritual identity has been achieved, automatically it will do the work. Now, thank you.